low-intensity conflict has been going on the Israeli-Lebanese border for months. Israel and Hezbollah have been shelling and launching drones and missiles on each other since the start of the war in Gaza. And the current hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah have the potential to grow into something way bigger. You can find similarities between the current round of violence and what went on in South Lebanon between 1982 and 2000. Welcome to our video on the emergence of Hezbollah and its fight against Israel in southern Lebanon. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us, we couldn't be doing it without your help. When Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, they thought that they had reached the main goal of their war, of displacing the Palestine Liberation Organization from Lebanon. Little did they know that now, instead of the PLO, they were getting a much more powerful and well-prepared enemy in Lebanon. After the end of the 1982 war, the IDF moved into the so-called security zone in South Lebanon on the border with Israel. For 18 years, the Israeli army and their allies from the South Lebanon Army controlled South Lebanon, but they were constantly harassed by various forces who opposed the Israeli occupation. At first, it was the Shia militia group known as Amal. However, another Shia group emerged from the chaos in Lebanon. It was Hezbollah. This religious, military, and political group emerged from the amalgamation of mostly Shiite groups, along with anti-Israel militants from various organizations. Due to the long-standing anger at the marginalization of Shias in Lebanon and the occupation of the Shia-majority South Lebanon, there already was a fruitful ground for the recruitment and consolidation of unhappy Shias. Therefore, when in 1982 the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps troops arrived in Lebanon to train Shia militia, thousands joined, including the recently killed leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. Gradually, Hezbollah became the strongest military and political force in Shia Lebanon. In 1985, Hezbollah officially announced its creation. Initially, the organization sought an Iranian-style Islamist governance, but over time, this organization has attempted to downplay its Islamist side, focusing on becoming part of the Lebanese political class. Eventually, Hezbollah turned into an important actor in Lebanese politics, both as a political party and a military force. In this video, we're going to focus only on Hezbollah's war against Israel. Throughout the 1980s and the 1990s, Amal and then Hezbollah regularly attacked the soldiers of the UNIFIL peacekeeping force and kidnapped Western military personnel and journalists. One of the most shocking episodes was the bombing of the US Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983, which killed 241 American and 58 French soldiers. Hezbollah still denies its participation in this attack, but it certainly made an impression on the West. But Hezbollah's main target was the IDF forces in the occupied South Lebanon and their proxies of the South Lebanon Army. Hezbollah proclaimed the end of the Israeli occupation as the primary goal of its attacks against the IDF. In November 1982, a suicide bomber, believed to be linked to Hezbollah, drove his vehicle into the building used by Israel's occupation administration in Tyre, killing 75 Israeli soldiers and tens of Lebanese and Palestinian prisoners kept in this building. A year later, in November 1983, a similar attack was made on an IDF base in Tyre, killing 28 Israelis and 32 Lebanese prisoners. In 1985, as a part of its several-stage withdrawal plan, the IDF pulled back from the Awali River. During this withdrawal, several Israeli soldiers were killed in a Hezbollah ambush. The Israeli army would regularly respond to such ambushes with deadly raids on Lebanese villages believed to be housing militants. As is often the case, many civilians were killed in such raids, along with the targeted combatants. As the IDF withdrew to South Lebanon, the fighting now mostly switched to this area, called the Security Zone. By then, Hezbollah was powerful enough to regularly harass the Israeli soldiers and the SLA forces in the south. Hezbollah aimed to force the IDF to withdraw from South Lebanon by constantly inflicting casualties on them, which would erode the Israelis' morale and activate domestic pressure to ensure their withdrawal. a classic guerrilla tactic of wearing down a stronger opponent by using the advantages of guerrilla warfare. According to Professor Judith Palmer-Harrick, Hezbollah's strategy was to stampede the Israelis and the SLA into as disorderly and as costly a withdrawal as possible by imposing casualties that further eroded the troops' morale and increased domestic pressure for their departure. Strategists, therefore, aimed at clever operations that would emphasize Hezbollah's implacability and long reach and demonstrate the enemy's vulnerability. And to implement this strategy, they carried out ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, suicide bombings, and other methods, eroding the will of Israel to continue occupying South Lebanon through 1,000 cuts. The IDF would retaliate against these attacks and kill and arrest militants and suspected sympathizers. Still, instead of deterring Hezbollah and other organizations from future attacks, this boosted their popularity and increased their legitimacy in Lebanese society. In 1987, Hezbollah took over an outpost in Brashit defended by the South Lebanon Army, capturing an M113 armored personnel carrier in the process, which was driven all the way to Beirut. This was seen as a major propaganda victory for Hezbollah. In April 1988, Hezbollah attacked the IDF in Sheba Farms, and it prompted the Israeli army to retaliate with a relatively large force against the Hezbollah base in the village of Maidan. It was called Operation Law and Order, whereby the Israelis killed dozens of Hezbollah fighters. Even though this conflict between the IDF and the SLA on one side and Hezbollah and other anti-Israeli groups on the other caused small numbers of casualties on the Israeli army in the 1980s, Hezbollah's reputation as the main force of resistance against the Israeli occupation continued growing in Lebanon. Remember that at this point a civil war was still going on in Lebanon. It gave rise to dozens of small and large armed organizations, including Hezbollah. When in 1989 the Taif Accords ended the civil war in Lebanon, all non-state armed groups were supposed to demilitarize in accordance with this agreement. But Hezbollah acquired something of a special status. Since Hezbollah was fighting Israel for the liberation of South Lebanon, it was allowed to exist as a resistance force. Syria, which exerted a major influence over Lebanon as it continued occupying a significant portion of its territory, was one of the main supporters of Hezbollah. Undoubtedly, their influence played a key role in this provision, as even after Israel eventually left South Lebanon, Hezbollah refused to disarm. And as Hezbollah did not disarm, it continued waging war against the IDF in South Lebanon. In 1992, the organization's leader, Abbas al-Musawi, and his family members were killed by an Israeli helicopter attack. Hassan Nasrallah became the new leader, until very recently. Under his leadership, Hezbollah gained further political legitimacy by winning seats in the Lebanese parliament in 1992 for the first time in its history. A bit before that, Hezbollah launched Al-Manar, a new TV station, which is still acting as the organization's mouthpiece. Both signaled Hezbollah's intention to solidify its political and media branches in its struggle for influence inside Lebanon and to fight against Israel. Nasrallah called for a retribution policy against Israel. He promised to attack Israeli territory for any Israeli attack on Lebanese civilian targets. Throughout the next couple of years, both sides continued attacking each other. Hezbollah kept slowly degrading the Israeli will to remain in Lebanon through suicide bombing and ambushes, which were shown on Al-Manar. At times, the footage, which was undoubtedly disturbing for Israeli society, would reach the Israeli households, further decreasing the domestic support to the continued occupation of South Lebanon. Moreover, supported and armed by Iran and Syria, Hezbollah was now using a new weapon to weaken the Israelis' resolve. Hezbollah would launch regular rocket attacks on North Israel, causing occasional civilian casualties and an increasingly uncomfortable political situation for the Israeli government. At 2 points, the IDF launched major operations to weaken, if not outright eliminate Hezbollah in the 1990s. In the summer of 1993, there was a major spike in violence between Israel and Hezbollah. More importantly for Israel, Hezbollah had increased the intensity of Katyusha rocket launches on North Israeli communities. Even though this fire was inaccurate and did not cause many casualties at all, it disrupted normal life for Israeli civilians. This prompted the then Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, to order Operation Accountability. On July 25, 1993, the Israeli Air Force started bombarding South Lebanon. The IDF fired 25,000 artillery shells. Although the Israelis tried warning the civilian population in advance about their strikes, more than 100 civilians were killed in this 7-day-long operation. The Lebanese infrastructure suffered massive destruction. Hundreds of thousands of Lebanese were displaced. Hezbollah retaliated with Katyusha rocket fire and killed 2 civilians in North Israel. Israel's massive bombardment prompted an international outcry, and on August 31st, the United States brokered a ceasefire, whereby the sides agreed to stop attacking civilian areas. This was Israel's largest military campaign in Lebanon since 1982, which aimed to teach Hezbollah a lesson about Israel's much superior firepower. The pause to violence was very short-lived, as less than 3 weeks later, several Israeli soldiers were killed in Hezbollah attacks. Evidently, Operation Accountability did not do much harm to Hezbollah, and after a couple more years of back-and-forth violence, the Israeli government decided to launch another operation. On April 9, 1996, Hezbollah fired several Katyusha rockets on Kiryat Shmona, injuring 5 people. The mood in Israel was in favor of strong retaliation. The Israeli Minister of Public Security, Moshe Shahal, said, "Israel must not restrain itself. It has to teach Hezbollah a lesson that the lives of our citizens are not fair game." On April 11th, the Israeli government launched Operation Grapes of Wrath with a massive aircraft and artillery bombardment of South Lebanon. Again, the IDF warned the residents to evacuate before their strikes. Still, even the official website of the IDF states about this operation that Shiite villages in southern Lebanon were bombed with the aim of causing civilians to move north towards Beirut, thus pressuring the Syrian and Lebanese governments to fight concretely against the actions of Hezbollah. Surely one of the aims of this bombardment was to cripple Hezbollah's military potential, but perhaps the most realistic way of eliminating the organization was forcing Lebanon and Syria into halting any relations with Hezbollah. Major General Herzl Bödinger, commander of the Israeli Air Force at the time, said, "The idea behind this operation is to create the best conditions on a national and diplomatic scale to reach negotiations with the Lebanese and the Syrians. Anyone refusing to evacuate was to be considered a Hezbollah accomplice." The SLA radio broadcast to the targeted villages on April 13th said, "In the light of continued terrorist actions by Hezbollah, the Israeli army will intensify its activities against the terrorists starting tomorrow, 14th of April 1996. Following the warning broadcast by the Voice of the South to the inhabitants of 45 villages, any presence in these villages will be considered a terrorist one. That is, the terrorists and all those with them will be hit. Any civilian who lags behind in the aforementioned villages and towns will do so on his own responsibility and will put his life in danger." Along with bombarding South Lebanon, Israel also blockaded the ports of Beirut, Sidon and Tyre. The civilian infrastructure of the capital, Beirut, was also targeted, and the surroundings of the Beirut airport and the power infrastructure of the capital were bombed. The worst episode of this 16-day bombing campaign was the shelling of the UNIFIL base sheltering civilians near the town of Qana on April 18th, which reportedly killed more than 100 civilians. Human Rights Watch reported that overall, 154 Lebanese civilians were killed during the operation. In this period, Hezbollah fired 639 Katyusha rockets on North Israel, mostly at Kiryat Shmona, forcing tens of thousands of Israeli civilians to leave the city. American military historian Matt M. Matthews argues that Operation Grapes of Wrath failed miserably and served only to further alienate scores of Lebanese people and produce widespread international scorn. The Israeli operations in 1993 and 1996 inflicted some damage on Hezbollah, but it also demonstrated that a bombardment campaign alone would be insufficient to challenge the organization properly. In both campaigns, Hezbollah managed to retaliate with its own strikes on civilian targets in Israel. In the following years, the fighting in South Lebanon continued. The IDF created the Igos Reconnaissance Unit, specifically tasked with countering Hezbollah. They were successful to a certain extent, as their operations led to the killing of many Hezbollah fighters, but in the grand scheme of things, they did not do much to change the situation. In 1998, 21 Israeli soldiers were killed in South Lebanon. In 1999, Brigadier General Erez Gerstein was killed by Hezbollah, becoming the highest-ranking Israeli officer killed in Lebanon. It was another important propaganda victory for the militants. Along with that, the anti-war movement in Israel was growing, and Ehud Barak, one of the main candidates to become a new prime minister on the eve of the 1999 elections, promised the withdrawal of the IDF from Lebanon. In July, he became the prime minister and pledged to withdraw to the border within a year. This only prompted Hezbollah to become more active. They promised leniency to all SLA fighters who surrendered before the Israeli withdrawal. In January 2000, they killed one of the main commanders of the SLA, Akhel Hashem, further deteriorating the will of the organization to fight. Many SLA fighters were already defecting. By May, the SLA started to disintegrate as scores of its soldiers surrendered to Hezbollah. On May 22nd, the IDF ordered the SLA units to withdraw to the border. At this point, the IDF and the SLA units started hastily withdrawing from their positions, often leaving their equipment behind. Hezbollah's TV channel Al-Manar was filming this withdrawal and the subsequent capture of the formerly IDF and SLA bases and strongholds by Hezbollah. Hezbollah planted its flag on each of the captured positions, scoring televised propaganda victories one after the other. The IDF withdrawal was largely seen as Hezbollah's victory in Lebanon. Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon did not end the war between Israel and Hezbollah, as you know. Instead, now the fighting would go along the border, as Hezbollah continued shelling North Israel and infiltrating to kidnap and attack Israeli soldiers. Now Hezbollah declared several other objectives in the fighting against Israel. They sought to free several thousand Lebanese and Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Second, they demanded the return of the disputed Sheba farms to Lebanon. And third, they simply rejected the right of Israel to exist. Therefore, fighting against the Jewish state was a goal in itself. The sides brace for another round of conflict, which we're going to cover in our next video. If you don't want to miss it, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.